Hey, Simon.
Hi,
Uh,
Anna.
Good to speak with you. Thank you for the great conversation on Twitter. It felt like 24 hours ago, so not that long ago. What we're having a conversation about, for those of you watching on the phone or on video rather, is that we're having a conversation about user adoption in Microsoft 365. And Simon Terry, um, you are a bit of an expert when it comes to all things adoption. So why don't you just first tell us where you are right now, and what you do in your day job?
I'm here in Melbourne, Australia, which is where I'm based, and work around Australia or Asia Pacific. And my role is I'm a change agent within Change Agents Worldwide, which is a group of individuals who specialize in adoption and future work practices all around the world. So we come together to share best practice and to help our clients really drive these tools and technologies to create great future of work experiences. That's our goal.
That's perfect. And you're the best brain for me to pick right now, because we're talking about all things sustainable adoption for
Yeah.
Microsoft 365. So there's one quote that I'm going to read out from your tweet. Basically, you said, you are a big believer in a clear story of the benefits of adoption for users and the company. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, one of the things when I started out working in adoption, one of the key things I noticed was there's a lot of discussion about the technology. Why
Mm,
should you use the technology? People get obsessed about the features. And
yes.
then you go talk to the business stakeholders, and the business stakeholders are like, I've got sales to achieve, or I've
Mm,
got a project to deliver. And so what you found was there was this mismatch between people talking about technology and the users and their organizations who are really driven by benefits and by value. They are
mm,
clear in what their strategies are. And what we needed to do was connect those two conversations. So I've used this approach for the last, 5 years and beyond that, of
mm.
focusing on what I call value creation. So how does an organization use Office 365 technology to create new and better value to achieve their strategic goals?
Mhm.
And the critical second part of it is you need to think about the user. So, what value does a user get from using these tools to do their day job, to grow as an individual, to be more successful in what they do? Because
Mm.
if you can create a conversation that's about the value to the organization and the value to the user, then what you're doing is you're aligning everyone behind successful adoption. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to create in the projects I lead.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that even we at Microsoft struggle with when it comes to trying to articulate the value of Microsoft 365, is that value means different things to different people. And I think that's something that you articulated really well in the blog article you just published a mere 3, 4 hours ago, it feels like. Yeah. So you had four factors, or maybe you can define it better than what I call them factors, but you mentioned they were growth, effectiveness, velocity, and protection. And each of those four things definitely break down what people would mean by value, but each of those individual things mean different things to different people, right?
Yeah. And so, the example I would use is we often think, take a classic example. Office 365 enables you to run meetings better because you
Mm-hmm.
can share the documents in advance. People can collaborate in real time. You can have, the kind of rich conversation we're having. You can have
Mm.
supporting materials. And so you might think of approaching an organization and saying, hey, we want to run meetings better.
Yeah.
But often that response gets a kind of, yeah, sure, right? Like, why do I get excited about better meetings, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you come at it from saying, what do you want to be more effective at? So
Mm.
you take effectiveness as a driver. You go
Yeah.
to the organization, you say, what do you want to be more effective at? And they go, well, hang on, we want to be more effective at running innovation projects, delivering them quickly, and producing better outcomes. And you go, well, how well do the conversations and meetings and document management in your organization support your projects today? And people
Mm-hmm.
go, well, not very well. We could do better. And all of a sudden, what you've done is you've created a connection between something that Office 365 features and benefits do really well and a core strategic driver of the organization. They want to deliver their projects better.
Mm.
Effectiveness has been triggered and you connect these features and benefits in. So what I do is I use those four things. Do people want to grow their organization? Do they want to be bigger? Where do they want to do more? The
Mm.
second is effectiveness. How do they want to do better?
Mm.
How do they want to be faster? That's what
Yeah.
velocity is about. And then the last one is how do people want to protect themselves? What are the risks and issues and challenges they have, and how do they want to mitigate those? And if you
Mm.
use those four questions to engage in a discovery around what value means to that organization, and it
Mm-hmm.
applies to individual users as well. You can ask
Mm.
those four questions are so generic that you can ask them about an individual user. How do you
Mm.
individually want to grow? How do you want to be better? How do you want to
Mm.
protect yourself? How do you want to be faster at doing something? And when you've got those answers, it gives you the ability to start searching for those critical use cases that power an adoption strategy. And
Mm.
those use cases can then be strategically aligned to what matters for that organization.
Yeah. So, and that's really interesting because you talk about value in those different, on those four different aspects, but you also mentioned that value is sort of translated from the end user point of view as well as from the organization's point of view, from the executive sponsors. So, is there I mean, I guess there's no right answer to this, I would assume, but would you say that you should probably approach the end users first to understand what value they want to achieve, or should you approach the executive sponsor first?
Well, I don't think there's a right answer because the
Mm.
answer is actually an iteration of
Right.
those two views.
Yeah.
Because my experience is end users want to know what's in it for the organization. We've
Okay.
all been trained to be efficient. So if
Mm-hmm.
someone comes to you and says, Anna, I want you to spend the next week stapling pieces of paper together, you're
Mm-hmm.
quite rightly going to say, well, what's the benefit for Microsoft of
Yeah.
stapling all that paper together? Before
Yeah.
you even ask, what's the benefit to me?
Mm-hmm.
So people ask both questions, and so both executives and individual users have to understand the benefits in both scenarios. They need to understand the organizational benefit and the individual benefit. Because when you make the individual benefit clearer to an executive, it washes away their resistance to the idea my employees aren't going to use this. The
Mm.
classic example you had the other day, which was in our Twitter chat, was,
Mm.
what if they say to me, I don't want back channels and
Yeah.
chats?
Yeah.
And you actually say to them, well, have you seen how many back channels your employees are already using? There's
Yes.
clearly a benefit here. Why don't
Mm-hmm.
you give them an official way to manage those back channels that has better integration with all the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the technology they're using, rather than
Yeah.
it being something that's on their phone and unsecure and has no connection to the documents they want to use.
Yeah.
So when you actually engage both senior executives and users in both the organizational benefit and the individual benefit, you end up with a much stronger self-generating push for adoption than you
Mm.
do if you come at them and say, staple these pieces of paper together.
Yeah.
Or at the other end of the spectrum, you go to them and you senior executives and you go, our people really want to use this app. And they go, well, what does it do for me?
Mm.
So you
Mm.
need both sides of the equation, and it will
Yeah.
take a conversation at both ends to end up with the match where the two come together. What
Yeah.
benefits the user benefits the organization, and that's the killer story for adoption.
Yeah, and that sounds completely right. I'm trying to think of a very typical scenario, and maybe you can tell me if this isn't typical or not. But digital transformation is kind of like the hot buzzword of the
Yeah,
last 12, maybe even 24 months. And so, if there was a scenario where, like, the head or an MD of an organization will go to IT and say, "So we want to do something digitally transformative. Tell me what to do." Like, would the first approach of the IT lead be to say, "Oh, let me firstly figure out what that means to you, but then also to ask, hey, tell me which department you want me to transform first. Give me a particular role so we can figure out what that value is. Would that be a
Yeah,
good
I mean,
approach?
yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's that process of dialogue. So,
Mm.
um, digital transformation falls into what I call capitalized nouns. Senior
Yeah.
executives love to use capitalized nouns: digital
Yeah.
transformation, engagement,
Yeah.
innovation, culture. The danger in organizations, if you just go running off with, I've
Mm.
been told to digitally transform, and you don't question that, you don't engage in a discussion around it, what happens is you come back and you go, look, we've taken this process and we've made it digital. And the executive goes, but I was talking about our web front end, like they're talking about something else. So this is again where I use those four drivers. So
Mm.
I will sit with them and say, when you talk about digital transformation, what do you want to grow? Are
Mm.
you trying to grow customers? Are you trying to, what do you want to do more of? What do you want to
Mm.
do better? And
Yeah.
and if you refine that capitalized noun down to some specific things, just as you say, they might
Mm.
mention a particular part of the organization, they might mention some roles, or they might mention usually what happens is they come out with the real problem. Oh,
Mm.
well, when I say digitally transform, what I'm really trying to do is make sure customer complaints drop
Yeah.
because customers are complaining about our website. Oh, hang on. What are they complaining about in the website? Oh, well, they're complaining that when they click the email me button, we don't send an email. Well, hang on.
Mm.
That's a specific, very narrow project that we can solve. And it might
Mm.
be about some flow integration and some email response messages. And there's things or it might be about connecting dynamics in so we can get a human to look at that problem quickly. In
Mm.
those scenarios, you've taken digital transformation down to a specific use case that can be solved. And then, just as you're saying, you've got to flip that and say, well, what's the user and employee view of that same scenario?
Mm.
Usually what you happen is you discover the reason that button on the website doesn't work properly is because the executive shouted at someone and said there has to be a button on the website, and
Yeah.
someone just put a button there without designing that process. So it's how we create conversations that enable our tools to start in solving
Mm.
these use cases.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. What if we flip the situation where the IT admin discovers that it's the end users who are actually leading the digital transformation to the point where they literally got their corporate credit card and just started a new instance of some CRM
Yeah.
solution?
Yeah.
Like, what would an IT admin do there, and how should they work with their execs?
Well, that's where I began my
Oh,
journey,
interesting.
becoming a Microsoft Office MVP, which is, I was in a financial services organization where
Mm.
people just fired up Yammer,
Yeah.
right? And it just started. And there was this nice nascent community. And what I did as a person involved in that community was I said, we're a bank. We're
Hmm.
not going to buy this product and turn it into something official unless it has a really clear value story, unless it
Mm.
has a clear value story for the organization and for the employees. So I went as a member of that Yammer community and I went and talked to everyone. I said, how are you using this? What value does it create? Where does it help you? What do we need to do to grow this community? And
Mm.
that's where my value maturity model came from, the connect, share, solve, and innovate, which is
Yep.
four simple steps that people go through as their Yammer communities mature in the way they
Hmm.
collaborate.
Yeah.
And what I found was that to get the organization to support this user created initiative, we had to be able to go to the most senior level in the organization and ask for a budget. And
Yeah.
if they asked for a budget, the questions they were going to ask me were, how is this strategically aligned? What value does it create? And what's the return on investment? And so
Mm.
basically, we had to have that story around how the value we were creating was aligned to the strategy of the organization, how it was also creating value for users. It was
Hmm.
exactly the same discussion, but led from the bottom up. So I
Mm.
basically did that work. We actually even crowdsourced the strategy in the
Oh, interesting.
community. So we
Ah.
used we used a Yammer group to ask the users what value they were getting, what they thought the organization should do to support the platform, whether it was worth investing. And we used that story to then build the PowerPoint deck we took to get support. And the best example of this is when I went to the senior executive who needed to approve it, he said, "Don't bother showing me the deck. I watched it be written in the Yammer group."
That's
So
so cool.
so so as someone who's trying to foster this community started things to push out competitive tools and perhaps replace them with ones, there's always grey market tools. You want to replace them with one that's more on architectural strategy for your organization.
Hmm.
Go to the users, work with them, show them the potential of a different tool that's better integrated, has better security, is got better AI behind it, all the things that we know the Microsoft stack brings to an organization. That's your way to, because if you turn up and say, turn this off and use this,
Mm.
users will quite rightly go, well, we got a community here. It's working.
Mm.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you work with them on a in the process of doing that work in that organization, we actually there were, the organization had multiple domains. So it
Hmm.
had 5 or 6 Yammer networks. We
Hmm.
actually had to convince other Yammer networks and competitive solutions to shut down and everyone to migrate onto the one domain to
Hmm.
really realize the value of the strategy.
Okay. So I guess, in a small organization, it might be pretty easy to try and drive that transformation because you're only dealing with a small number of people. But likely in a larger organization, it's harder to get everyone on board. So, I mean, I've heard training is really important, internal comms are really important. Do you have any very concrete examples of how we can, drive sustainable adoption?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is why I'm passionate about the potential of tools like Yammer.
Yeah.
I think Yammer sits as one of those enterprise-wide outer circle conversations where you can draw people's attention to training materials. You can draw people's attention to use cases. You can engage senior leaders into the discussion
Mm.
to endorse the strategy that you're trying to run through adoption. I think all of these things are really important.
Mm.
Role modeling is one of the most powerful things. When you get a senior leader to say, this is how I do my work using these tools and how these tools make me more productive and why I like having the app on my phone,
Mm.
those stories are so powerful in driving adoption. I mean, the answer to your question is, I'm kind of an absolute magpie in terms of using anything and everything to drive
Yeah.
adoption. I think you need
Yeah.
to wrap people with, because the answer is some people love to watch a video and learn from that. Some people like to talk to their peers. Other people like to see a diagram or have a process chart.
Mm.
You got or do a training program. You got to do a bit of everything. But what
Yeah.
I find is that saying everyone's got to do the training is the surest way to push everyone away.
Mm.
Let it's for me, the power of these tools working together is very much a pull story. So let
Mm.
people pull the solutions that suit their needs. And the role of great adoption is to wrap people around with a magpie's assortment of ways for them to decide to pick up adoption and make it work for them.
Yeah. Because you're right. Like everyone also learns in a different way. And I think the stat I heard is that there are potentially 5 different generations in the workplace right now, and they all
Correct.
have different ways of wanting to learn.
Yeah,
Mm.
you can't. This, I mean, I'm always suspicious of someone who promises you a silver bullet. Like if
Yeah.
someone says, I can guarantee you 100% adoption within 30 days or 90% adoption within a month or whatever the 90 days, whatever the magic is, you've
Hmm.
really got to say, because as we've already talked, it's highly contextual. It depends upon the organization, the people, the strategy, the users. It's everyone is different. Everyone
Mm.
works in ways. Everyone, no two users will use the tools in a different way. There's an academic here in Australia called Kai Riemer, who's an
Mm.
absolute gem in terms of thinking about these tools and how they get used. And Kai talks about understanding that their infrastructure and infrastructure is open. It's one of the, it's open to all sorts of uses. There's no use case programmed into Microsoft Office 365 that you have to use. You
Yeah.
can use part, and some people don't use any of it, right?
Yeah.
Perfect adoption does not exist.
Mm.
So, what we need to do as people leading adoption is to work with users, to work with the organization. And because at the end of the day, you don't want people using their tools for their own sake. You want them to do something with it. And the
Yeah.
focus needs to be on creating that value.
Yeah.
And if the answer is 10% of your organization needs to use the tool to maximize the value, and that might be with some of the niche parts of the Office 365 stack,
Yeah.
that might be the case. You probably don't want every user in the organization to use Flow. It's
Yeah.
probably not something that you're going to get value from. But there's
Yeah.
probably 10% of people for whom that could deliver significant value tomorrow.
Yeah.
So understand where you're going to get value, who's going to use what, and see those things play out as the
Yeah.
organization grows and develops. And over time, those things will change. If
Yeah.
all those Flow MVPs out there are hating on me, the point is it might become the
I
tool of
love
the
Flow,
future.
by the way, just letting
I,
everyone know.
I
Flow's
know.
great.
I've mentioned it twice because I love it too, but I'm just saying it's not necessarily something you want everyone to be
Agree.
focused on.
Yes, yes, completely. And one of the things that I was kind of gobsmacked over was that, someone was telling me, well, we don't want to try this particular solution unless we know there's a very similar company who's done the exact same thing and we want to deploy that exact solution. But are you saying that you are a carbon copy of this particular organization? Like they just want reassurance that this will work. So I guess my question to you is like are there any reassurances on digital transformation, or is it kind of like we're just going to throw something on the wall to see if it sticks?
Well, I think there's two things. One, you can't show them a carbon copy, and
No.
to be honest, why are they? If they've got a competitor that's done some exact thing, why do you think doing what your competitor's doing is going to put you in a better? Again, let's come back to the value. Is that going to give you more, better, safer, faster? Probably not. It's going to leave you where they are at best, right?
Yeah.
So, what you can do is show them there is an infinite array of use cases that suggest people have benefited from using these tools. Microsoft has great stories out there of clients who've benefited from using these tools. But what you want to do is focus on how do we experiment? How do we learn? How do we test what it means in your organization, in your context, how you do better, faster, safer, more. How do you make those terms make sense for you? That's the thing. And look, not everyone has 100% success rate. You're gonna try some things, they're not gonna work, and you're gonna learn and evolve. This is the big thing that I object to is when organizations go, oh, we've put an adoption budget in place for the next 27 days. And you're like, okay, great. What happens on day 28?
Yeah. Yeah.
People need to think about this as an ongoing part of their technology and their business activities. Is how just as they might have a continuous productivity improvement team somewhere that's continuously investing in how processes improve, why wouldn't you continuously invest in delivering better work adoption and better work strategy? Because the reality is, if those things are driving to your organizational strategy and they're delivering enough value, why wouldn't you keep investing? There's clearly an ROI there for doing more and doing it better.
We could honestly talk for hours on this topic.
I could definitely talk for hours.
Yeah, and it's great, and I want to continue the conversation on Twitter, or there's a whole plethora of different things, but I definitely want people to be reading your latest blog article. Where can they find it?
Look, if they go to simonterry.com/sharing, they'll find my blog, and it's sitting right there. So
Yeah.
simonterry.com, and look for the blog posts, which are right on the front page.
Yeah, the 4 drivers of value. That's the one, right? Breaking down the value of collaboration.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anna.
Cool. Thank you so much, Simon. If you guys want to continue talking about modern workplace, make sure that you have a conversation with me and Simon on Twitter. We're here to answer your questions. There's a whole bunch of people in the community having the same conversation too. So looking forward to continuing the conversation there. Thanks so much.
Look
Bye.
forward to it. Thanks, Anna.
Bye, Simon. Bye-bye.
Bye.